This story is so haunting it leaves you holding your breath. Set against a backdrop of wind-scoured desert and fading sunlight, it unfolds where grief, courage, and fate quietly collide on the edge of the frontier. It begins with one wounded man left to die. A small moment that was enough to change 2 lives forever at Ashen Vows. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. They came upon him at dusk, collapsed in the powdery dust beside the last standing cactus on a high desert ridge. A broken, unmoving shape wrapped in torn buckskin. Clara Whitmore, a solitary frontier widow known for steady hands and a healer's nerve, should have ridden past and left him to fate. Saving an Apache warrior was the kind of mercy that dragged danger straight to a cabin door. Yet something in his eyes stopped her. Pain lived there, yes, but also pride, and a thin, stubborn thread of hope. As night rolled in across the Arizona plains, Clara made a choice that defied fear. That single act would unsettle old grudges, draw unexpected bonds, and set in motion a quiet miracle no one could have predicted. The sun refused to yield, hanging low and fierce, washing the desert in burning reds, deep amber, and molten gold. Clara urged her paint horse forward, brushing grit from her linen skirt. Cold already crept up from the ground, and her small homestead lay another mile down the dry track. The sky stretched without end. From the jagged eastern mountains, whispered about in campfire stories, to the western horizon where the sun hovered, ready to vanish. Clara knew solitude well. She had chosen it after life dealt her more sorrow than she could carry. A year earlier, she had buried her husband, Samuel Whitmore, taken by dysentery on the road outside Tucson. With what little money remained, she bought a humble cabin near a shallow creek north of the San Pedro River, deep in disputed Arizona territory. Land balanced uneasily between cavalry patrols and Apache ground. She was barely half a mile from home when she noticed the buzzards circling. Dark shapes cut lazy arcs in the air. Clara's stomach tightened. Something had died, or was close to it. She nearly rode on. Nothing good ever followed scavengers, but the oath she had taken as a nurse, first spoken back in St. Louis, would not release her so easily. As the last light flared across the land, Clara turned off the trail and guided her horse forward. It did not take long to find him. At first, she wasn't certain it was a man. A battered, wide-brimmed hat lay askew, dark hair spread across the sand. His clothes were soaked in old blood, hanging in tatters from broad shoulders. He lay on his side, breath shallow and uneven. The buzzards waited on a mesquite branch, patient. Clara's heart jolted. She had seen death wear many faces: gunshot wounds, shattered limbs, slow poison from infection or venom. But rarely had she found a man so close to the edge, alone, with no one to stand witness. She dismounted carefully, led her horse aside, and knelt. His face was lean, high cheekboned, skin burned dark by sun and years of hardship. One arm bent wrong, clearly broken. A ragged bullet wound marked his ribs. Clara eased back the blood-caked cloth to see better. Dried blood streaked his chest. Fresh blood seeped with every breath. Then she froze. He was no settler. He was Apache. If the cavalry learned she had tried to save an Apache warrior, especially one they might have shot themselves, she would risk everything she owned. Still, Clara brushed the hair from his face. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, his lips parting with a faint rasp. "It's all right," she murmured, unsure whether the words were meant for him or herself. "I'm here. I'll help you." Before doubt could catch her, Clara Whitmore moved on instinct. She dug into her saddlebag, fingers closing around bandages, a small bottle of whiskey, and the stethoscope she had carried since leaving St. Louis behind. She missed the clean order of hospital wards, the proper tools. But the frontier offered only what you carried. In the last wash of daylight, Clara pressed her palm to the man's brow. He was burning with fever. The bullet wound would have to be cleaned, and there was no sign the shot had passed through. The slug might still be inside him. She drew a slow breath. "I won't leave you here," she whispered. The words trembled, edged with resolve and fear. If cavalrymen had done this, they could still be close. Or worse, other Apaches, or enemies who would finish the work. Clara understood the danger clearly. Still, she could not turn away. Calling on every ounce of strength, she eased the man's uninjured arm over her shoulder. He let out a low sound of pain, but could not resist. She half carried, half dragged him toward her horse. It was brutal work, yet Clara was no fragile soul. She had hauled water, split wood, and lifted wounded men heavier than this during the war. Bit by bit, she hoisted him up, lashed him across the saddle, and prayed he would live until morning. The ride back stretched endlessly as the sky deepened into violet. Stars came out sharp and cold. Clara guided the horse with care, every dip and stone threatening to jolt the wounded man past endurance. She murmured to him under her breath, steady words meant to anchor him, though she wasn't sure he understood English or heard her at all. When her cabin finally appeared among rock and cactus silhouettes, relief hit her like a wave. She slid down, scanning the land. Cavalry patrols passed through this region from time to time, especially under officers like Marcus Hale, known for measured judgment and relentless pursuit of Apache bands. Clara had also heard talk. Whispers of ranchers funding vigilante outfits, stirring old hatreds. This borderland had carried tension for years. Hiding an Apache could cost her everything, but she had chosen. She would not turn back now. With steady hands, she unlocked the cabin door. It was little more than a single-room shelter, but it was hers. A small table stood in one corner, a narrow bed in the other. A cast-iron stove held the chill at bay. Her medical supplies rested on a shelf, precious and few. She dragged the man inside and eased him onto the bed. He groaned softly. Clara's heart pounded. She knew the coming hours would decide everything. She lit the lantern, its glow revealing bare walls and worn furniture. His breathing rasped, fever raging. "How did you survive out there?" she murmured, wiping sweat from his brow. She opened his torn shirt, exposing the wound fully. Under the lantern's yellow flicker, its severity was unmistakable. Someone, perhaps the warrior himself, perhaps a companion, had pressed a rough cloth against it once, but it had done little to slow the bleeding. If the bullet had lodged near his lung or vital organs, infection could claim him by morning. Clara set water to boil on the stove and reached for her surgical kit, what little she had been able to bring from the hospital. Preparing herself for what came next, she uncovered the slender forceps and the nicked, time-worn scalpel. Clara Whitmore had performed rough surgeries on battlefields before, but never alone, never in a desert cabin with no one to steady her hand. Bracing herself, she soaked a cloth in whiskey, offered a silent apology for the pain to come, and began. Her hands shook just enough to notice as she worked to cleanse the wound. She wiped away blood with careful pressure, searching for any sign of the bullet. The man stirred, eyes fluttering open, their gazes locked. In his, she saw terror, raw agony, and a stubborn refusal to die. "I have to take the bullet out," Clara said quietly, not knowing if he understood the words, trusting the calm in her voice would carry the meaning. She slowed her breathing and slid the forceps into torn flesh. He jerked with a deep, animal groan that filled the cabin. Clara did not stop. She felt the hard curve of metal near a rib. Inch by inch, she guided the instrument, caught hold, and drew it free. Blood welled instantly. Her heart hammered. She moved fast, fresh bandages, firm pressure to slow the bleeding. She poured whiskey into the wound, flinching for him, knowing the fire it would bring. Then she stitched with practiced speed, the muscle memory of countless nights in war hospitals guiding her hands. When she finished, she wrapped his chest tight. Sweat slicked his skin from head to toe. The fever still raged. Clara laid a cool compress across his forehead and turned to his arm. Broken, likely near the forearm. Using splints cut to size, she bound it straight and secure. The work may have taken an hour. It felt like a lifetime. When it was over, Clara sagged, shaking with exhaustion. But he was alive. She prayed he would stay that way through the night. Dropping into a chair, her eyes fell on the bullet resting on the table. Dull, blood-smeared, unmistakable. A .45 caliber. Cavalry issue. Fear tightened her chest. If the army was hunting this man, if they learned of her part in keeping him alive, what would follow? Night stretched long and heavy. Clara slept in short bursts, waking often to check him. He drifted in restless dreams, muttering in a tongue she didn't know. The fever burned high. Clara kept him drinking, easing water and herbs past his lips. She remembered a remedy taught by a Mexican midwife in Tucson. A tea brewed from desert plants to draw out heat. She had gathered the herbs weeks earlier, unsure why. Now she brewed them carefully, whispering a prayer over the pot. In the quiet, her thoughts carried her back to St. Louis, to the day she met Samuel Whitmore. He had been training as a physician, warm-eyed and quick to laugh. Together they volunteered on Civil War front lines. Clara as a nurse, Samuel as a field surgeon. She remembered endless tents, wounded men crying out, the weight of loss. And somehow, love had grown there. After the war, they married and chased hope west. Fate did not spare them. Within months of reaching Arizona, Samuel fell ill. Clara watched him fade, helpless. When he died, she believed her purpose had gone with him. Yet here she was, saving a life again. This time, the life of a man her own people called an enemy. The West was never simple. Clara Whitmore had witnessed cruelty on every side of this land. She had seen Apache families driven onto barren reservations, left hungry and stripped of dignity. She had also heard the stories whispered in towns, raids in the dark, blood taken in revenge. The desert carried all of it. Secrets, grief, old wounds buried beneath the sand. But alone in her cabin, Clara refused to draw lines or weigh blame. There was only one truth that mattered. A wounded man needed help. That was enough. When the first pale light crept through the dust-streaked window, Clara stirred awake. The warrior shifted on the bed. He tried to sit up and failed, pain cutting through him. Clara was at his side instantly, her hand firm but gentle on his shoulder. "Easy," she said. "You're safe." He studied her, dark eyes clouded with doubt. "Where?" he whispered, his voice dry and broken. Clara lifted a tin cup and pressed it to his lips. He drank slowly, each swallow measured. After a moment, he spoke again, the words rough and accented. "Thank you." Relief loosened her chest. He knew some English. Enough, maybe. That mattered. She touched the bandage at his ribs. Careful. You had a bullet inside you. She mimed the motion of removing it. Your arm is broken too. His gaze swept the room. Clara realized he was searching for weapons. His knife and belt sheath rested on the table beside a scarred rifle she had found strapped to his back. She had placed them there deliberately, out of reach, but not hidden. My name is Clara, she said quietly, touching her chest. Clara Whitmore. She gestured to him, waiting. He drew a strained breath. Taza, he answered, the name leaving him with effort. Taza, Clara repeated, nodding. You'll live, Taza. The bullet's out, but you need rest. The fever hasn't broken yet. She carefully loosened the bandage to check the stitches. Blood had soaked through, but not dangerously. She replaced it with a clean wrap, noting the way his jaw tightened against the pain. He remained silent, eyes moving, calculating. The tension between them was thick and unmistakable. He was Apache, part of a war that never truly slept. Clara knew how thin their safety was. One passing cavalry patrol, one curious neighbor, and everything could collapse. But for now, the morning sun spilled gold across the floorboards, holding a fragile peace inside those four walls. Taza was alive. She had pulled him back from death. As she helped him drink again, a quiet sense of pride and hope rose in her chest. Perhaps mercy still had a place in this hard land. Clara fed the stove, chasing away the chill of late autumn dawn. She set a pot to simmer, dried meat, a handful of beans, nothing fancy but warm. While it cooked, she watched Taza drift in and out of fevered sleep. Then the silence broke. A distant, rhythmic thud rolled across the desert. Hooves, Clara Whitmore went rigid. A sharp unease crawled up her spine. She leaned toward the window. Dust spiraled along the rocky track, and through it she caught the dull flash of uniforms. Cavalry scouts, 2, maybe 3, riding straight toward the cabin. Her pulse slammed. She turned and hurried to Taza. We have to hide you, she whispered, even as doubt gnawed at her. He barely had strength to sit, much less move. His eyes opened, and he tried to rise, but pain tore through him. A harsh breath hissed from his teeth as the hoofbeats closed in. Clara's thoughts raced. The barn was too far. The root cellar beneath the cabin was little more than a pit. Tight, dark, barely fit for a man. But it was all she had. She slid an arm beneath Taza's shoulders, taking his weight. I'm sorry, she murmured as she felt him shake. Step by step, they crossed the cramped room. Clara wrenched open the trapdoor set into the floor and guided him toward the ladder. His injured arm made every movement slow and dangerous. A cry nearly escaped him. Clara clapped a hand over his mouth, holding him steady until he reached the bottom. She dropped a blanket down after him, then shut the trapdoor and dragged a small rug over it. Her heart thundered. She barely reached the front door when a sharp knock rattled the wood. Clara forced in a breath and opened it. 2 frontier scouts stood outside. One was tall and broad, a dusty bandana knotted at his neck. The other was younger, sweat streaking his face beneath a battered hat. Morning, ma'am, the taller one said, tipping his brim. Sorry to trouble you. We're looking for a wounded Apache. Seen anything unusual? Clara's stomach twisted, but her face stayed calm. No, she said. The lie came clean. Just got up to make breakfast. Something wrong? The younger scout shifted in his saddle, eyes narrowing. "He's dangerous," he said. "Shot one of our men a few days back. Known to move through this country." Clara folded her arms, concern carefully measured. "I haven't seen any Apaches around here. I keep to myself." The taller scout nodded, glancing past her into the cabin. Clara stepped just enough to block his view. "All right," he said. "We'll move on. If you hear anything, report it. Captain Marcus Hale is offering a reward." Clara managed a tight smile. "I'll remember that. Good luck." They tipped their hats and rode off, dust curling behind them. Only when the sound of hooves faded did Clara sag against the door, breath trapped in her chest. She had lied. She had hidden an Apache fugitive. The cost of discovery would be ruin. Still, she knew, without question, she would do it again. When she was sure they were gone, Clara pulled back the rug and lifted the trapdoor. Cold, damp air spilled up. She peered down at Taza, crouched among sacks of potatoes and onions, shivering, sweat shining on his skin. She climbed down carefully and wrapped the blanket tighter around him. He looked up, gratitude in his eyes, and the weight of the risk she had taken. "Soldiers?" he whispered. Clara Whitmore nodded. "They're gone, for now. But we have to stay careful." She rested a hand on his uninjured shoulder. "Let's get you back to bed." With slow, steady movements, Clara helped him climb the ladder. She settled him onto the mattress, held water to his lips, then checked his temperature. The fever still lingered, but it no longer felt as fierce. Relief washed through her, though her nerves still buzzed from the narrow escape. Taza's voice came out rough and low. "You? Good woman." Clara felt her face warm at the simple words. "I'm only doing what I can." She hesitated, then tried again. "Why?" She searched for the right way to ask. "The soldiers, why are they hunting you? What happened?" Taza closed his eyes. For a moment she thought he would stay silent. Then slowly, in broken English, he spoke. "They kill my family. My brother, Koa. I fight back." A cough shook him, sweat gathering at his temple. "Ambush. They shoot me." He lifted his good hand weakly toward his splinted arm. "I fall. Left for dead." Tears burned behind Clara's eyes. She had heard the stories, Apaches painted as ruthless raiders. But she also knew how unforgiving the cavalry campaigns could be. "I'm sorry," she whispered, unsure the words could reach the depth of his loss. "They say you shot one of their men," she added softly. Taza's expression hardened, anger flashing through the pain. "Soldiers come to my village. We protect ourselves." His English faltered, but the meaning was clear. Out here, truth was never clean or one-sided. Clara reached for his hand. After a pause, he closed his fingers around hers. The gesture was small, human, stronger than fear, stronger than the labels the world had given them. They were two lives caught in a land shaped by violence, building a fragile trust behind closed doors and lowered voices. Over the next few days, Clara cared for Taza without pause. His fever eased, strength slowly returning. She cooked plain meals, brewed healing teas, and changed his dressings each morning and night. The wound began to close, though she watched it closely, cleaning it with the last of her precious carbolic acid from St. Louis. In that time, they learned to speak in small ways. Taza knew more English than she first thought. Clara picked up a handful of Apache words in return. He taught her how to say thank you, Asha. She laughed softly at her own clumsy attempt. They spoke little, always aware that secrecy wrapped every moment. Her nearest neighbor lived miles away. She prayed no one would come knocking. Tension hung over the territory. Patrols rode past often, and Clara feared that the next knock on her door might carry sharper suspicion. She knew Taza could not remain hidden forever. He was still too weak to travel, but once he could walk, he would likely leave to find his people. The thought tightened her chest. She feared for him, and she knew, just as surely, that her own life would not be the same once he was gone. The feeling growing inside her had no easy name. It was part protectiveness, part wonder, and part certainty that something larger than chance had drawn them together. Late one evening, worn down by chores, Clara sank into a chair. Taza lay awake, watching the lantern flame flicker and sway. She felt his gaze resting on her, heavy with questions neither of them spoke. The silence stretched until he finally broke it, his voice rough but steady. "Clara, you lost someone." The words caught her off guard. Her breath stumbled. It was too direct, too precise. Then she realized he must have seen it, the weight she carried, the hollowness she never quite hid. She nodded, throat tight. "My husband. Last year, he fell sick." Her voice wavered. "I tried to save him." The rest dissolved, trapped behind memory. Taza watched her closely, his expression softening in a way she hadn't expected. "I lose family too," he said quietly. "Many." He paused, searching for words. "Soldiers. Hunger. This land is hard." Tears gathered in Clara's eyes. She found an unexpected comfort in his understanding. For so long she had carried her grief alone, haunted by the belief that she had failed Samuel Whitmore, weighed down by the unforgiving truths of frontier life. Now she was sharing that sorrow with a man she had met only days before, an Apache warrior the world told her to fear. Silence settled again, but it was a kind one. The lantern light flickered against the walls. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She heard Taza shift on the bed, then felt his hand lift. Gently, he brushed a single tear from her face. Clara closed her eyes, letting the moment hold her. For an instant, the desert vanished. The soldiers, the bloodshed, the endless conflict fading into nothing. Inside that small cabin, two wounded souls found refuge in each other. She sensed with quiet certainty that while she was healing his body, he was mending something broken deep within her. Morning came, wrapped in an uneasy stillness. Clara stepped outside to draw water from the shallow creek. The sun barely cleared the eastern ridge, washing the desert in pale color. A coyote's howl drifted across the plain. She scanned the horizon for dust. Any sign of riders or a neighbor's wagon? Nothing moved. Still, unease lingered. The frontier scouts might return. Worse, a larger force could follow. She had heard rumors in town that Captain Marcus Hale was pushing harder than ever, hunting down the last Apache bands. Tensions had flared after ranchers were killed to the south. Fear bred anger. Anger bred violence. Clara knew the cycle well from her war nursing days. She carried the water back inside. Taza was sitting up now, carefully testing his splinted arm. He looked up and met her eyes with a faint smile. "You feel stronger?" she asked, setting the bucket down. He nodded, though pain was etched clearly across his face. "Soon I must go." The words struck hard. Clara had known this moment would come, but it still tightened her chest. "Is there somewhere safe?" she asked. "My people hide near the mountains," he said, "but soldiers follow." He touched the bandage at his side. "Maybe I find them." They think I am dead. Clara pressed her lips together. She hesitated, then asked softly, knowing the answer might change everything. Will you be safe if you go back? Clara Whitmore asked. Taza offered a faint, bittersweet smile that barely touched his lips. This land is always dangerous, but soldiers cannot take what lives in our hearts. He held her gaze. I owe you a debt. My life is yours. Color rose to Clara's cheeks. You don't owe me anything, she said quietly. I only did what any decent person should. Taza shook his head. Few would help an Apache. You have courage, Clara. He spoke her name with care, with respect. The weight of his gratitude blurred her eyes. She rested a hand on his good shoulder. You will always be welcome here, she whispered, surprised by how true it felt. That afternoon, Clara helped him to his feet, steadying him as he stood. Pain crossed his face, but he managed a few careful steps. His arm remained bound and useless, yet his legs held. She guided him slowly around the cabin, helping him regain balance and strength. If all went well, in a few days he might try to ride out. Though the thought of him traveling alone, wounded, tightened her chest. She had just eased him back onto the bed when noise erupted outside. Shouted voices, frantic hoofbeats. Clara's heart lurched. She looked at Taza. His body went rigid, eyes darting to the weapons on the table. Hide, she mouthed. Despite his protest, despite his insistence that he could fight, she helped him back to the cellar. Clara shut the trap door just as a heavy fist slammed against the front door. She opened it slowly, her pulse roaring. This time it wasn't scouts. 4 men of a cavalry patrol stood outside, rifles ready, dust curling around their boots. Their leader stepped forward, sun-browned face lined, a thick mustache framing his mouth. He tipped his hat, stiff and formal. The captain's insignia caught the light. Afternoon, ma'am, he said. Apologies for the disturbance. We have urgent business. His eyes were sharp, measuring. We're tracking a wounded Apache believed to be in this area. Has he passed through? Clara's heart pounded. She felt how thin the ground beneath her had become. She kept her voice level. No, sir. I haven't seen anyone, just me and my horse. She gestured toward the small corral behind the cabin. One of the soldiers, a wiry man with a restless stare, leaned forward. Mind if we take a look around? The man we're after is badly hurt. Couldn't have gone far. Ice ran through her limbs. Refusing might draw suspicion. If they found Taza beneath the floor, everything would be lost. She swallowed and forced a smile. Of course, she said, stepping aside. There isn't much to see. They filed in. Clara's gaze flicked to the rug hiding the trapdoor, praying they wouldn't notice the slight rise beneath it. The captain scanned the cramped room, the table, the bed, the stove, the few shelves. You live alone? He asked. Yes, Clara replied softly. I'm a widow. I came here for the quiet, Clara Whitmore said. The captain nodded and stepped closer, his eyes drifting toward the bed. Clara's heart slammed. She tried to remember if any bloodstains still showed. She wasn't sure. Another soldier began poking around the table. She silently cursed herself for the rifle, then remembered she had slid it under the bed earlier. Would they look? The wiry soldier's attention fixed on the rug. He took a step toward it, his brow tightening. Panic knotted Clara's stomach. She prayed for anything, any interruption. Then a voice shouted from outside. Captain, we found tracks leading away from here. Marcus Hale turned sharply toward the doorway, where a soldier stood, breathless. "Out by the North Ridge," the man added. "They might be old, but they're worth following." The captain's expression hardened. He turned back to Clara and tipped his hat. "Ma'am, we appreciate your cooperation. We'll be moving on, but understand, this Apache is dangerous. If you see him, send word to Fort Bowie." Clara nodded, her face carefully blank. "Yes, Captain." The cavalrymen filed out, leaving the door swinging as they hurried back to their horses. Clara waited until the thunder of hooves faded into the distance. Then, legs shaking, she shut and locked the door and rushed to the trap door. Taza looked up at her from below, question written across his face. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and reached down to help him climb out. Once he was back on the bed, Clara pressed a hand to her chest, her heart still racing. "They're gone," she whispered, "but they'll keep searching. We don't have much time." Relief and worry crossed Taza's face. He squeezed her hand. "I must leave soon." Her heart sank, but she nodded. She knew it was true. Keeping him any longer would put them both in danger. Still, the thought of him facing the desert and the army alone filled her with dread. Early dawn crept across the land. Blue and cold, muting birds sung and washing distant mesas in pale light. Inside the cabin, Clara stirred a pot of broth, the scent of sage and dried meat filling the air. She glanced at Taza. He was sitting upright now, shoulders squared despite the strain etched across his face. "You shouldn't stay up too long," she said gently. "I must," he answered. His voice was rough, but steadier than before. "I need strength to leave." The word leave tightened something in her chest. They had both known this moment was coming. She had only hoped it wouldn't feel like losing a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. Over the next 2 days, the cabin, their home in a way, became a place of quiet preparation. Clara gathered what he would need. A water canteen, healing herbs wrapped in wax paper, strips of smoked meat, and a few dried apple slices she had saved for winter. Taza tested his rifle, the battered weapon Clara had kept hidden beneath the bed. He turned it over with careful respect. "Still good," he said simply. "It won't let me fall again." His broken arm was still splintered, the cloth wrap firm but careful not to bind too tight. Clara Whitmore changed it each day, using what little antiseptic she had left with the focus of a battlefield nurse. The swelling had eased some, and though a faint red ring kept her wary, there were no signs the wound was turning worse. "I wish I had more medicine," she said one evening, sitting across from him at the table. A small lantern burned between them, its flicker casting shadows across Taza's sharp features. "You already gave much," he replied. "More than most would." Silence settled, easy and familiar. It had become their way, pauses that spoke as clearly as words. Still, Clara felt something pressing at her chest, a truth she needed to release before time slipped away, like rain on dry ground. "I used to think my life ended when Samuel Whitmore died," she said quietly. "I came here to hide, not to heal, not even to live. I just wanted to disappear." Taza never looked away. "But you saved me," he said. "And you saved me," she whispered. That night, Clara dreamed of her husband's hands, the same steady hands that once guided her through crowded field hospitals, through loss and hope. In the dream, he smiled and nodded toward a distant mesa. She woke with tears on her cheeks, understanding that what she had found with Taza was not a replacement for Samuel, but a continuation of what he had believed in: healing a broken world. At dawn, Clara guided Taza through his first steps outside. The desert air was crisp, alive against their skin. Her mare, Sage, waited nearby, already saddled. "You'll ride my horse," Clara said. Her voice faltered, and she cleared her throat. "She knows this land. She'll carry you farther than your legs can right now." He stopped. "Your only horse." "I'll manage," she said, forcing a light tone. "I've walked through worse pain than this." He hesitated, then reached out and rested his hand gently on her arm. "You give horse. Home. Medicine." "Why?" Clara met his eyes. "Because once someone gave me love when I was broken. I suppose I've been trying to pass that on." He studied her for a long moment. Then Taza lifted his hand and cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing beneath her eye. She leaned into his touch, holding the warmth. "Asha," he murmured. "Clara, you are brave." She helped him mount Sage, adjusting the stirrup carefully to spare his injured arm. The saddlebags were packed: food, water, healing leaves, and a small pouch of coins hidden beneath the lining. He didn't need to know about that yet. "Go northeast," she told him. "Follow the dry creek until it splits at the red rock. Take the ridge trail. It's rough, but they won't track you there." He nodded, gathering the reins. He looked down at her then, his expression guarded, though something flickered behind his eyes. Gratitude, regret, maybe something more. "I will not forget you," he said. "And I'll never forget you," she answered. "When you find your people," Clara added softly, "tell them you lived because someone believed you were worth saving." He seemed to take that in, then leaned forward in the saddle. "One day," he said, "maybe peace will come. Until then, stay safe," Taza said quietly. Clara Whitmore stepped back, tears shining in her eyes. "Ride hard," she answered, "and remember, you're not alone anymore." With a final nod, he turned Sage toward the open land. Clara stood with her arms wrapped around herself against the cold, watching as he disappeared between boulders and stands of ocotillo, the rising sun laying a path of gold before him. When the dust finally settled, she turned and walked back to the cabin. The door creaked as she closed it behind her. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with memory, courage, and something that felt dangerously close to love. Clara stood by the window for a long while, watching the sun climb. Somewhere beyond the ridges, Taza was riding toward freedom, and she had been part of that journey. No one could take that from her. Days passed. Clara tried to return to her routines. She felt the absence of her horse keenly, and the quiet inside the cabin pressed heavier than before. She walked into town when she had to, once borrowing a mule from a kind neighbor, Martha Cole, and returning quickly. She kept her head down, wary of questions. None came. The nights were the hardest. Clara lay awake listening to the desert wind, wondering if Taza had found his people. She worried about infection, about patrols, about the chance that he might be ambushed again. She was only one woman, unable to slow the vast currents of violence shaping the West. 2 weeks later, Clara rose before dawn to draw water. She still used the mule for longer trips, but for small tasks she preferred to walk. The morning air was sharp, the horizon washed in gray. As she neared the creek, a sound carried on the wind. Hoofbeats, distant but closing. Her heart jumped. Cavalry? She slipped behind a mesquite and peered through the branches. 3 riders emerged from the haze. One was clearly Apache, bareheaded, hair worn in the traditional style. Another wore a band across his brow. The third led a horse burdened with a bundle that caught faint light. Clara's pulse raced. Had they come for her? Should she run? Then she remembered Taza's words. I will not forget you. Drawing in her courage, she stepped out and called softly. Hello? The riders reined in. She saw they held no rifles in their hands. Still, she knew they would be armed. One man dismounted and approached slowly, lifting a hand in peace. Clara recognized him from stories told in these lands. A man of sharp bearing, marked by quiet authority. He could be kin to Taza, perhaps even a sub-chief. She wasn't certain. Are you Clara Whitmore? He asked in careful English. Yes, she replied, her voice unsteady. He nodded and motioned to the third rider. A large covered bundle was eased down from the saddle. The rider, a young woman, untied it with care and held it out. The older man turned back to Clara. You helped my nephew Taza, he said solemnly. He lived. He found us. He told us of your kindness. Relief flooded her. Her eyes filled. Taza was alive. A rush of gratitude swept through Clara Whitmore. I'm so glad, she whispered. The older man nodded and continued. We bring you a gift, from our hearts. At his signal, the young woman stepped forward. Naya knelt and carefully untied the bundle. Clara caught her breath. Inside lay finely woven blankets, rich with bold geometric designs, their dyed threads catching the morning light. At the center rested something heavier, a weathered silver concho belt, each disc set with turquoise. Every piece bore the mark of careful hands, each stone carrying the story of the land itself. Clara had never seen anything so beautiful. Please, the elder said, his voice steady. Take this. We are grateful. Overwhelmed, Clara shook her head. I can't, she said softly. It's too precious. He placed a gentle hand on her arm, his gaze kind but unyielding. You saved Taza. You gave him your horse, your only horse. These blankets and this belt were made by our people. They are worth more than gold or money. We wish to share them with you. Tears slid down Clara's cheeks as she felt the weight of what was being offered. The history, the trust, the bond now tying them together. She reached out, fingertips brushing the vivid weave of a blanket, then the cool metal of the conchos. I'm honored, she whispered, her voice breaking. The elder allowed himself a small smile, a rare warmth etched by years of hardship. Taza sent word as well, he said. He wants you to know he is healing. Clara clutched the bundle to her chest, tears flowing freely. Please thank him for me, she said. And thank you for trusting me. The riders inclined their heads. Without ceremony, they mounted their horses. Clara hesitated, unsure if she should say more. The elder paused. We must go. Soldiers watch these lands. Be safe, Clara. They turned and rode into the pale sunrise, disappearing as swiftly as they had come. Clara stood motionless in the cold dawn, the Apache gifts held against her like a sacred promise. The riders vanished into the desert, leaving only a thin trail of dust that slowly faded on the breeze. Her eyes stayed on the horizon long after they were gone, as if willing herself to follow. The silence that settled was unlike any she had known before. Different from the quiet before Taza. before the knocks of soldiers, before whispered truths shared between two wounded souls. This was a silence filled with awe, with deep gratitude, with something close to reverence. At last, she turned back toward the cabin, clutching the bundle as though it might vanish if she moved too quickly. Inside, shadows lingered in the corners, and the faint warmth of last night's fire still breathed in the air. She knelt at the table and slowly unwrapped the gifts. The blankets were alive with color, reds, blacks, and golds, forming zigzags of thunder, mountain steps, symbols of the sun. They felt less woven than remembered, as if stories had been stitched into every line. Her fingers traced the cloth, then paused at the concho belt. Dozens of silver ovals, worn smooth by time, yet gleaming with quiet pride. Each turquoise stone held the blue of desert sky after rain. She touched the belt with careful reverence. It was more than beautiful. It was sacred, a work of spirit and memory, a history carried through countless hands, something no coin could buy, something never offered without meaning. Her breath caught. This was not a simple thank you. They had placed a piece of their people in her care, a living sign of kinship, of respect, of peace. Clara Whitmore, a white widow once swallowed by grief, had been accepted, honored, by those the world so often painted as enemies. Her hands trembled again, not from frailty, but from the weight of what it meant. This was not payment for mercy. It was a declaration. We see you. We value you. You are not forgotten. She remained there for hours, barely moving, her fingers tracing cloth and silver, trying to absorb the stories woven into every thread and stone. Her thoughts drifted to Taza, riding toward his people, bones still healing, spirit still scarred. She imagined him dismounting, telling of the woman who pulled him back from death, who risked her life and her soul to protect him. Was he thinking of her now? A gust rattled the cabin shutters, pulling her back. She stood and carefully folded the blankets, placing them atop the dresser. The concho belt she set beside her sewing box, its silver catching the lamplight. For a moment, she considered hiding it. Many would covet such a thing. But no, this honor would not be buried in fear. It deserved to be seen. It deserved to shine. As the day warmed, Clara stepped outside, her boots crunching softly in the sand. She walked to the place where she had first found Taza, collapsed near the sage, blood dark against the earth. The memory struck hard, the ache in her arms as she lifted him, the burn of whiskey poured into torn flesh, the long night fighting death by lantern light. She hadn't only saved a man. She had defied expectation. A white woman aiding an Apache warrior was not just dangerous, it was unthinkable. Yet, she had done it. And that defiance had been answered not with vengeance, but with honor. She sat on a sun-warmed stone and let the wind tear through her hair. The desert stretched endlessly, harsh and wide. And still, in that vastness, she felt something she hadn't known in years. Not since before Samuel Whitmore died. Purpose. Not as a nurse, not as a settler, but as a woman finally at peace with herself and with the land. She thought of Samuel. If he had lived, would he have understood her choice? Would he have helped Taza too? A small smile touched her lips. Yes. Samuel had always believed healing came before fear, before politics. He would have called her brave, perhaps foolish, but brave. And now Clara understood something deeper. Her life was not merely an echo of Samuel's ideals. It was a life reforged. His death had nearly shattered her. But her choice to trust, to help, to love, had stitched her spirit whole again. She rose, brushing dust from her skirts. The air carried creosote and juniper. Somewhere high above, a hawk cried. Clara turned her gaze toward the northern ridges, the path Taeza had taken. She whispered a prayer, not to church or tradition, but to the earth itself. Let him live. Let him find peace. Back inside the cabin, Clara Whitmore fed the fire, set water to boil for tea, and began to sew. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. As the needle passed through cloth, she hummed under her breath. It was an old tune her mother once sang when the river iced over and the world turned white. A lullaby about endurance, about lasting through hard seasons. The concho belt lay beside her, catching the firelight with a quiet glow. It reminded her that survival did not always mean hiding. Sometimes it meant standing firm, hands open, heart unguarded. So Clara stitched, not merely a hem or a sleeve, but something deeper. The belief that true wealth was not locked away in chests or weighed in gold, but shared between souls. Out here, in the untamed desert, where bullets, fear, and prejudice had long ruled, a single act of compassion had forged a bond stronger than fences or fort walls ever could. Clara Whitmore came to understand that real treasure was not measured in silver coins or dusted gold. Sometimes it was found in quiet trust born between strangers. By saving an Apache warrior left for dead, she had not only preserved a life, she had restored her faith in humanity. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.